Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Revelation chapter 13 foretells the establishment of a socialistic one-world government in the end time. It also states that this world government and the eventual leader of that entity, the Antichrist, will receive power from Satan himself to rule the earth. Well, we will discuss one of the major propaganda schemes being used to push this agenda, which is global warming, pushing the world government agenda, which leads to climate change. The current effort to establish the world government is Satan's effort to build his physical kingdom on the earth. So we're going to be talking about the world government today, but before I get into that, I got a couple real quick announcements. You know, we take a tour every year to Israel. We're going twice this year. We're going here in the next, four to 5 weeks, something like that. We've got 3 spots left. And if you'd like to go with us, call Holly, call Jana. We're going to go to Israel and Jordan. We're tying 2 countries in it. And so join us. What a spiritual experience that we've had over the years. I've had many people say, hey, this is the first day of the rest of my life going on this trip, getting baptized, the spiritual experience that happens. So we've got 3 spots left to fill. So call Jana, call Holly, my daughter, and get in on the trip. Secondly, and very important, I'm going to be preaching in Sherman, Texas this weekend. On Saturday night from 6 to 8 p.m., I'll be at the Apostolic Pentecostal Church in Sherman, Texas. That's 5525 North Travis. And then on Sunday morning from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., and Sunday night from 6 to 8, I'm not going to be doing prophecy. I'm going to be teaching evangelical message, evangelistic. And so if you've never heard me preach, come in here and see what God will do. I'm believing God that He'll really give a message to that church up there. So if you'd like to come and Saturday night, again, that's in Sherman, Texas, 5525 North Travis Road. I'll be doing prophecy, the new Trump prophecy lesson, and that's from 6 to 8. And then Sunday morning, 10 to 12, and Sunday evening, 6 to 8 p.m. I'll be teaching, Sunday morning I'm going to tie a little bit of prophecy into it, but I'll be teaching evangelistic messages on Sunday morning and Sunday night. If you'd like to come up and hear me, I'd be happy for you to meet me up there and see what God will do this weekend. Now, we're talking about world government, and one of the ways, this all goes along with the Sustainable Development Goals that were signed on to by all of the nations on the planet back in 2015. It's the United Nations Universal Agenda 2030 to transform the world. Well, global warming, which leads to climate change, which obviously that's a hoax. But this is one of the ways, the scare tactics that they're using, this created crisis that they're using to scare people into allowing them to getting them to yield up their sovereignty in the name of security, so that way they can, they're setting up a world government. They want to govern every aspect of your life. And so they want to control coal-fired plants. They want to go to clean energy. They want to go to all kinds of different things. But at the end of the day, it's a wealth redistribution scheme. They're talking about carbon cap and trade laws where they want to tax factories for putting off too many carbon emissions, and that factory would have to buy carbon credits from an underdeveloped nation, but it doesn't solve the problem. So we're talking about global warming, which leads to climate change. One of the major planks that is used by the United Nations and the world government to establish the world government on the earth. It's a complete hoax. Hillary Clinton said, never waste a good crisis. Well, this is their dreamed up crisis because it's not true. So the fact is, CO2 emissions, you hear about this all the time in the news. CO2 emissions are creating, human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change. CO2 emissions have nothing to do with global warming. The global warming fear-mongering is simply a scheme put together by global elites to redistribute the wealth of the world and to move us into a world government. It's a socialistic principle. The United Nations is 100% socialistic, one world governing body. This is a socialistic principle, wealth redistribution. It's a big part of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's world government. It's prophesied about in Revelation chapter 13. And I'm going to give you some examples of how far people are willing to go to sell these scare tactics on today's program. It's crazy. Can't believe some of these people are going this far into it. So the Scientific American reported that the Environmental Protection Agency, many of you guys know that the EPA chief is Scott Pruitt. He has refused to link CO2 and global warming. So when we get back from the break, I know we're coming up on a break here, so when we get back from the break, I'll get off into what he said, because he's the head of the Environmental Protection Agency now. We'll get off into what he said and then get to some examples of this United Nations propaganda that people are spinning, this dreamed up crisis in order to global govern every person on the planet.
We live in critical times. If the final 7 years started today, would you know what to do? God's people need to understand the prophecies that are taking place. Daniel 11:33 says, "And they that understand among the people shall instruct many." To guide the people around us, we must first receive instruction ourselves on the biblical prophecies of the end time. End Time Ministries is introducing the End Time 1000. We have created Jerusalem Prophecy College online to help you be ready to inform those around you. The goal is to have at least 1,000 people prepared to instruct others. By joining the End Time 1000, you can fulfill Daniel 11:33. Sign up for Jerusalem Prophecy College online and be equipped to guide your friends and loved ones during the final 7 years. Go to JerusalemProphecyCollege.com. That's JerusalemProphecyCollege.com.
So I'm Alan Mounsley and I'm from New Zealand, and I've been following End Time Ministries for 21 years. I started following End Time in 1996 when someone handed me an End Time magazine. Well, the understanding that came from the End Time magazine led into me being able to watch the original 10 lesson series. And so from there it gave me a clearer understanding of everything that was going on around me, whether it was to do with politics, religion. It made me view the news different, what I was reading, what I was listening to. I was able to reach other people through the End Time, and I would buy bulk load magazines and then I would hand them out. From there I started turning it into doing seminars, taking End Time material myself, renting a small room or a hall out and then presenting it to friends, family and other people. Thank you for giving to End Time Ministries.
With every dollar, you change lives and provide hope for people just like Alan Mountsey. Thank you for giving to End Time Ministries.
So the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt, he's not convinced that carbon dioxide from human activity is the main driver of climate change. And he said that he wants Congress to weigh in on whether CO2 is a harmful pollutant that should be regulated. Scott Pruitt is a climate change denier. I believe the climate changes. I don't believe global warming leads to climate change, okay? But Scott Pruitt is a climate change denier who sued the EPA before he was the chief more than a dozen times when he was Oklahoma's Attorney General. He said he was not convinced that carbon dioxide pollution from burning fossil fuels, and I'm going to get into this here in a second. You can't believe what people are saying about the burning fossil fuels. And, the Obama administration went on this war on fossil fuels and coal burning plants. But Scott Pruitt, the current head of the EPA, doesn't believe that carbon dioxide pollution from burning fossil fuels like oil, gas, and coal is the main cause of climate change. That's why? That's because it doesn't. It's not the main cause. This is just one more way that globalists are trying to propagate the United Nations, which is the current world government, their wealth redistribution scheme. This is the same world government prophesied in Revelation chapter 13. The world government, the Bible says there's going to be a world government established in the earth just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And remember, from Revelation chapter 13, that this world government is Satan's effort to establish his kingdom. So think of it like his kingdom on the earth. Think of it like this. It's all based on deception and lies. So you wonder, why are all these people saying this stuff about global warming, which leads to climate change, but you guys are saying it's a hoax? Because number one, it is a hoax. Number two, the Bible tells us that Satan is going to be the instigator, the main driver behind this world government. And John 8:44 says this about the devil. It says, "Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father ye will do." He, it's talking about Satan, was a murderer from the beginning. He abode not in the truth, because there's no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. So Satan can't tell the truth. So if he's just trying to establish his government here on the earth, which will be this end-time world government the Antichrist will rule over, it has to be based on deception and lies. So when you talk about global warming, which leads to climate change and this, that, and the other, I'm going to prove to you here in a little bit, it's a wealth redistribution scam. That's all it is. For the governments of the world, this world government, to believe that it can control the atmosphere and control the temperatures and make the earth heat up and cool down, that's crazy. The fact of the matter is that it's a hoax. God controls the atmosphere. God controls, He's been controlling the thermostat for thousands and thousands of years now. We can't do that. Only God can do that. And so it's all of this stuff, all of these major platforms from the United Nations, it's all based on a lie. There's an ulterior motive to all of it. So remember, there are two kingdoms that we are currently dealing with. Number one, God's kingdom, which is absolutely built on the truth. John 8:32 says, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free." So there is a truth that we can know. The second kingdom is Satan's kingdom, built on deception and lies. And one of these major deceptions, this world government, which is being propagated, is the hoax of global warming, which leads to climate change. So let me show you what I mean, and kind of to some of the extent that these globalist people that run in this, have this mindset, what they'll go to propagate this false message. So Politico, they ran an article that said Arnold Schwarzenegger is to sue Big Oil for first-degree murder. Now, if you think about that, if you look at that, just the headlines, you would think, oh, if you heard that on the news tonight, you would think somebody went out and committed murder. Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger's next mission is taking on the oil companies, taking them to court for according to him, for knowingly killing people all over the world. So, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's the former California governor, movie star. I'm sure most of you know who he is. And a global environmental activist, very key phrase there, believes in this, the United Nations, this hoax that's going on, this propaganda. He announced the move this past Sunday. He's revealing that he's in talks with several private law firms and is preparing a public push around this effort to sue these big oil companies. He said this is no difference than the smoking issue. The tobacco industry knew for years and decades that smoking would kill people, that it would harm people and create cancer, and they were hiding that fact from the people, and they denied it. Then eventually they were taken to court, had to pay hundreds of millions of dollars because of that. Well, he went on to say that the oil companies knew from 1959 on, and they did their own study, that there would be global warming happening because of fossil fuels. Okay, now that's where we get to the breakdown. And he says, on top of that, that it would be risky for people's lives and that it would kill. Well, here's the problem. CO2 emissions have nothing to do with global warming. It's such a minuscule that it's basically nothing. Scientists have proved conclusively that throughout time, if you look out through the temperature records for hundreds and thousands of years, CO2 levels only rise as a result of increased temperature, not the other way around. There have been times throughout history when CO2 levels begin to rise, or the temperature began to rise, and then there was an 800-year lag, and then CO2 levels would rise. So temperature rises first, then CO2 begins to rise, not the other way around. But of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger doesn't believe that, so he's going on a huge campaign to sue the oil companies. Well, a lot of people get behind him. He's a movie star. He used to be the governor of California, influential individual, and if he goes on CNN or someplace tonight, everybody buys into it. There's global warming, which leads to climate change. It's simply not true. Remember, there's an agenda. It's being pushed by the United Nations, And Arnold Schwarzenegger has aligned himself with the United Nations in the past. He created a foundation which was going around working towards taking care of this propaganda scheme, global warming, which leads to climate change. And he would meet with the United Nations and these different things. He would have break-off groups at Davos, Switzerland. And he would have them in Cancun at the global warming summits and different things. So you can tell exactly what he's trying to do. He's pushing this propaganda. He did it while he was a governor. He's a global environmental activist now. So he's going to sue the big oil companies. Well, then the New American reports that there was a play recently, and it's ongoing now, and it's actually called, it's making its 2018 debut in Australia. It's called Kill, and K-I-L-L, Kill, Climate Deniers. So, I mean, come on, just when you thought it was safe to challenge the pseudoscience behind the idea of human-caused climate change, why would you challenge it? Because it's a hoax. A play with the title, Kill Climate Deniers. And I don't deny that the climate has changed. I deny global warming leads to climate change. That human-induced global warming leads to climate change. Well, they're saying, hey, we need to kill climate deniers. This play was actually titled that. I mean, imagine, who would allow such a thing? Well, it premiered March 1st for its 2018 run at the Griffin Theatre in Sydney, Australia. And yes, it is an actual play scheduled to run through April 7th. And get this, it was initially commissioned in 2014 with a $19,000 grant from the Australian government. So you can see how this agenda is being pushed. Kill climate deniers. So the plot of the play is as a classic rock band takes the stage, the Australian Parliament House is stormed by 96 eco-terrorists, people that don't believe in global warming leads to climate change. And they're intent on ending global warming that very night, unless their demands to end all carbon emissions and coal exports are met. And what happens? Or they will execute their 1,700 hostages. That's in the play, folks. What's the name of the play? Kill Climate Deniers. I mean, this is how far they will go to push this global warming, which leads to climate change agenda. And it's a complete hoax. It's been proven by thousands of scientists to be a hoax. You say, well, hold on a minute. I've heard people like the Obama administration and a lot of different newscasters say that 90% of the scientists agree that it's the truth. Well, that's actually not a true statement. 97% don't agree because, now, 90% of the ones that might be on their payroll agree, But when it gets down to it, there are, and if I can get to it, I've got them, a lot of them listed here in the latter part of my program. I have renowned scientists that are saying this is an absolute hoax. There are people that were on Al Gore's staff who, when he started perpetrating this stuff, that they would not agree with him and he fired them. I'm talking about very reliable and creditable scientists who have studied this stuff for years and years and decades. When they wouldn't buy into Al Gore's propaganda, he fired them off. No, it can't work for me because you're not going to buy into this. Now, that's the kind of mess we're talking about here. Why? Because they're pushing a global governing agenda. And the reason I'm talking to you about it today is the Bible says there will be a world government established in the earth just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, and Satan will be the driver. The Bible says that the dragon, which is Satan, Revelation 12:9 tells us that it's Satan, will give this entity, this Antichrist and his world governing body, his seat, power, and great authority. The power to drive this comes from Satan himself. It's his effort to establish his government, his kingdom here, a physical kingdom here on the earth. And so it's all based on deception and lies. If I can get a big enough crisis going and scare people enough, then they will allow me to go in and push them out of using their vehicles and getting onto bicycles. And I'll push them from living out in the country and being scattered into cities, and where I will and into a lot of apartment buildings where I can manage them. And you see what I'm saying? It's all about global governance, smart cities, smart meters, the internet of everything, and all of these, the Internet of Things. And so it's very important that we understand there's a huge agenda. Say, man, what's driving all this? There's a huge agenda to establish a world government, and their tentacles are everywhere. And the global warming, climate change scam is one of their propaganda methods. It's keeping everybody in a perpetual state of fear. It's what it's all about, scaring people into compliance. But they need a big enough crisis. So now that they went from global warming to climate change, they can blame it on everything. This tornado that comes in through, between Texas and Oklahoma, we're fixing to go into like the tornado season. They'll blame all that on global warming. The hurricane that happened down here in Houston, it was blamed on global warming. I mean, you name it. Because, hey, it's climate change. Even though throughout time, we've always had tornadoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, but now they're blamed on global warming. And the only solution to this, according to these globalists, is more governance of everybody and governing what factories do and this, that, and the other. You realize they could govern all of that 100%, and it's not going to change hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, and all that stuff. Think about it. The driver is a wealth redistribution scheme, because they tell us that in the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'll get to that here in a second. Then the Daily Caller reports that the Ninth Circuit Justice, the court just allowed children to sue Trump over global warming. I mean, this gets crazier and crazier the more articles I read on it. A federal appeals court ruled last Wednesday in favor of 21 children and young adults suing the U.S. government for not doing enough to protect their constitutional right to a stable climate. So they want the government to protect their right to a stable climate, okay? God's given us a stable climate for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But now these individuals are suing the government because they believe they have a right to a stable climate. There's nothing, if there's going to be a hurricane, there's nothing our government can do to stop that. God controls all of that, folks. We can't take God out of the equation. He is the equation. He controls everything. We're totally relying upon Him. But when you take God out of the picture and out of your thought process, then you think, we need more government. So you see, it's totally upside down the way it should be. So Olson's case on behalf of the youngsters argues that constitutional rights to life, liberty, and property are being violated by the federal government's failure to enact policies to stop catastrophic global warming. So they want the government to stop this hoax that they've dreamed up, that there's global warming which leads to climate change. Do you see there's so many wires here that are not connecting. Why? It's a hoax. But they're wanting to manage you and to globally govern every person on the earth, so they got to have this crisis. And all of this is prophesied about in the end time. Thank goodness that not every nation on earth will come under the reign of the Antichrist, the United States being one of them. But we've got to talk about it because it's prophesied to occur and we're watching it happen. And then the International Business Times states that the global warming, get this, they got to keep the scare tactics going. So the International Business Times reported that global warming rise of a 0.5 degree could flood 5 million people. 0.5 degree. I mean, yesterday here in Dallas, it was, I don't know what, in the 60s maybe, and it got down to 38 degrees last night. And guess what? It's back up to, 60, 70 degrees out there right now. But there's no tsunamis coming along. There's no tornadoes and earthquakes and different things. 0.5 degree is what these guys are talking about. It says scientists warns if global warming levels rise by even 0.5 degree, folks. I'm not making this stuff up. It could lead to over 5 million people being potentially flooded out of their homes within the next century. 0.5 degree. You see what I'm saying? I've read so many of these articles, my head is swimming about this stuff. What are we talking about? We're talking about the efforts, and I'm going to get into the United Nations when we come back from the break, and Agenda 2030 and what they're trying to do. And I'm going to show you that they're saying it's not possible without the redistribution of wealth. Why? Because the United Nations is socialistic, and that's one of their main planks is socialism, wealth redistribution.
Israel, there is no other place like it on the face of the earth. Over 4,000 years ago, God gave this land to Abraham and his seed and said that he would put his name in Jerusalem. The world watches as this tiny nation stands in spite of all the obstacles. Irvin and Judy, along with the End Time team, would like to invite you to travel with us to the Holy Land. This trip will be a wonderful and life-changing experience. Our Spring End Time Prophecy Tour will have the privilege of being the first End Time tour to visit Jerusalem as the recognized capital of Israel. Some of the highlights will be the Mount of Olives, the Temple Mount, the Tomb of Jesus, the boat ride on the Sea of Galilee, the baptisms in the Jordan River, and we will also visit Petra in Jordan. If you would like to experience the Bible in full color, join us April 26th through May 11th, 2018. Call 1-800-END-TIME, that's 1-800-363-8463, and press 2, or go to endtime.com/Israel Tour to receive your information today.
Do you believe we're living in the end times? If so, what's the one magazine you should subscribe to? End Time is the magazine designed to guide you through the end times. Irvin highly recommends End Time magazine so you can stay informed with what's going on in the news and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Call 1-800-363-8463 and get End Time magazine for 2 years for only $29. Call 1-800-END-TIME or go to endtime.com to take advantage of this special offer.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archives button.
You know, you might be asking yourself, where is all of this coming from? I mean, who's the driver behind all of this? Well, it's the United Nations. If the United Nations would stop hammering on this stuff, then all of these, there would be no agenda to drive. But because they need a scare tactic, something to keep everybody in fear mode, so that way they can yield up their sovereignty and their freedoms in the name of security by the world government, then If they would stop hammering on that, everybody would just say, oh, it's a non-issue, which it isn't. But they've got to have this scare tactic. So, in Agenda 2030 from the United Nations, it's called Transforming Our World. That's exactly what they're trying to do. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. You wonder what these smart cities and smart meters and all of them wanting to put cameras everywhere and all this different, connect everything with RFID chips and to see what's on your computer, what do you watch on TV? I mean everything. Why are they doing that? Surveillance tactics and getting these cashless societies and all of that. Why? Because they want to control every aspect of your life. It's a world government. So the preamble of the 2030 Agenda is, this agenda is a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. As we embark on this collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind. So what they're saying is this is universal. This is every person on the planet. They're not just saying everyone's going to be left behind because they want you to feel good about it. They're saying no one's going to be left behind. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets, if you haven't read through these, folks, you've got to read them because this is what they're trying to do to you and to me. And these 17 goals and 169 targets, which are announced, they demonstrate the scale and ambition of this new universal, global, worldwide agenda. That's what it is. It's an agenda. There's an agenda behind all of this. They say that these are our shared principles and commitments. I'm not going to read all of them. I'm going to read the ones that are pertinent to my program today. Number 10 is the new agenda is guided by the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, including full respect for international law. Why would the President of the United States sign the United States onto this mess? The charter was written by a convicted communist spy, Alger Hiss. And so, but we're a capitalistic nation. We're the United States of America. We signed a Declaration of Independence, not interdependence, on a global governing body. But yet, our previous administration signed us lock, stock, and barrel onto this stuff. Thankfully, Donald Trump come along and said, hey, I'm going to pull us out of a lot of this. I'm going to pull us out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which obligated us to support the climate change agreements in the Sustainable Development Goals. And then number 27, it says we will seek to build strong economic foundations for all of our countries. Sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth is essential for prosperity. That sounds great. Then it says this will only be possible, and this is so key, everybody. This is in the 2030 Agenda. This will only be possible. It doesn't say if we go in and train underdeveloped nations so that way we can raise them out of poverty. Doesn't say that. It says this will only be possible if wealth is shared and income inequality is addressed. It doesn't say we're going to go in and set up trade schools and teach them how to farm better and build better communities. That's not what they're going to do. It says we want wealth to be shared. So in the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development, they're saying all of these things are only possible if wealth is shared. It's a wealth redistribution scheme. Global warming, which leads to climate change and all of this stuff. That's what cap and trade tax laws are for. To cap carbon emissions on factories, buy carbon credits from an underdeveloped country, and so they can continue on emitting their carbon pollution is what they call it. But yet nothing changes. They don't care about the environment. They're caring about transferring wealth from the United States or other developed nations to underdeveloped nations. Say, well, that sounds good. No, that's robbery. Let's go in and train those individuals and bring them up out of poverty through education and different things. Let's not go in there with and just hand them wads of cash. That's not going to do anything. So then in proving my point, Investors Business Daily ran an article so critical to what I'm talking about today. It said, and this is I think 2016, but think about it, so critical. Investors Business Daily said another climate alarmist admits the real motive behind the warming scare. It said another warming climate admits the real motive behind the scare. This was in March of 2016. It's very critical you understand this, though. It's a fraud. It says while the global warming alarmists have done a good job of spreading fright, it's exactly what they're trying to do. Remember, they said if it goes up a half a degree, that we're going to flood 5 million people. So, I mean, if you're living out on a coastal waters, you're going to think, they got to do something about global warming today. Don't worry about it. God's got your back. You don't have to worry about this stuff. This world's going to be around for a long time. There's a 1,000-year millennial reign coming. It's not going to flood everywhere. I mean, this is propaganda, okay? Don't pay no attention to this stuff. This is Satan's deception and lies. His whole kingdom's built on that. And it says that they haven't been so good at hiding their real motivation. They're scare tactics, they're putting it out there, but there's a real motivation behind this. Yet another global warming alarmist has slipped up and revealed the catalyst driving the climate scare. They say we've now been told for almost 3 decades that man has to change his ways or his fossil fuel emissions will scorch the earth with catastrophic warming. Remember what I just said about Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to sue the oil companies because they've led to global warming and it's killing people and all kinds of stuff. Okay. Well, scientists, politicians, and activists have maintained the narrative that their concern is only about caring for our planet and its inhabitants. But this is simply not true. The narrative is just a ruse. They're after something entirely different. If they were honest, the climate alarmists would admit that they are not working feverishly to hold down global temperatures. I mean, they're talking about half a degree, folks, half a degree. They would acknowledge that they are instead consumed with the goal of holding down capitalism and establishing a global welfare state. That's what they're trying to do. They don't like the United States having all the money. They don't like us at all. Most of the world does not like us. So, you having doubts? Well, listen to the words of former United Nations climate official Ottmar Edenhofer. He said, one has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environment policy. It's not. He said this has almost nothing to do with the environmental policy anymore, with problems such as deforestation and the ozone hole. Edenhofer, who co-chaired the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It was the bought and paid for scientists that were putting out all these stats that, the world's going to burn up. He was working on the group on mitigation of climate change from 2008 to 2015. What would he say the goal of the environmental policy is? He just come right out and said we'd redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. I mean, he come right out with it and said it's a wealth redistribution scheme. For those who want to believe that maybe Edenhofer, he just misspoke. Didn't really mean that. You got to look at a little more than 5 years earlier when he also said that the next World Climate Summit in Cancun at that time is actually an economy summit during which the distribution of the world's resources will be negotiated. It wasn't even about the climate. It was about wealth redistribution. And as mad as they are, Edenhofer's comments are nevertheless consistent with other global alarmists who have spilled the movement's dirty secret. It's all about wealth redistribution. Do you remember Christina Figueres, the executive secretary of the UN's Framework Convention on Climate Change? She said, this is the first time in the history of mankind that we're setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution. So she's talking about the global warming climate change crisis. This is the first time we've had to really change the economic model. She said this in anticipation for the Paris Climate Summit that happened in 2015, which led to the Paris Climate Agreement that Donald Trump just pulled us out of. Now, are you thankful for that? She said this is probably the most difficult task we've ever given ourselves, which is to intentionally transform the economic development model for the first time in human history. So the plan is to allow third world countries to emit as much carbon dioxide as they wish, because just as Edenhofer said, in order to get rich, one has to burn coal, oil, and gas. He admitted it. And he was on the IPCC, the International Panel for Climate Change. But while at the same time restricting emissions in advanced nations. That's what carbon tax and trade laws was all about. And this will, of course, choke economic growth in developed nations, but they deserve the fate as they have basically expropriated the atmosphere of the world community. So the fanaticism runs so deep that one professor even suggested that we need to plunge ourselves into a depression to fight global warming, even though it's a complete hoax. They don't care about America. All they want to do is redistribute our wealth to underdeveloped nations. Now, I'm not against helping nations. I'm not against that at all. No, I mean, anybody who has a Christian ideology, they wouldn't be against that. But I don't want it stolen from me and handed to somebody else. I mean, come on. So another person, Naomi Klein, she summed it up best, what the warming, the fuss really is all about in her book, The Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate. She said, what if global warming isn't only a crisis? What if it's the best chance we've ever had, we're ever going to get to build a better world? There you go. So it was it's this dreamed up crisis, this scare tactic that we can blame when the wind blows around the corner of your house. Climate change, we've got to change this. In her mind, the world has to change or be changed because an economic system, meaning free market capitalism, has caused environmental wreckage. Folks, this is how the global warming alarmist, that's how that whole community thinks. It wants to frighten, intimidate, and then assume command that it needs a crisis to take advantage of a hobgoblin menace to the people so that they can beg for protection for the imaginary threat. The alarmists' better world is one in which they rule a global welfare state. They've admitted this themselves. So it's very important we understand there's a world government being established, and the global warming climate change is a scare tactic. It's a hoax. And they're trying to get you and me to yield up our securities.
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter, the new book by Irvin's grandson, provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your connection to God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at End Time will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real life change. Order this brand new book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
Turn your scriptures from black and white into color. Experience the footsteps of Jesus. Understand Bible prophecy that is coming to pass right now. Join Irvin and Judy Baxter and the End Time team this spring 2018 for a life-changing trip to Israel and Jordan. Mark your calendar for April 26th through May 11th for this amazing journey. Call 1-800-END-TIME, that's 1-800-363-8463 and press 2, or go to endtime.com/Israel-tour to receive your information today.
So the global warming climate change, they're trying to scare us into accepting a world government. Climate change. Actually, the climate has changed every day since God created the earth. Let's just boil it down to its essence. It's really easy to understand. If you take God out of the equation, sure, anything could happen. You could believe anything. There's unicorns running around in downtown Dallas. But there's no such thing as unicorns. But if you get that told enough, you would think if it was on CNN every night for the next 3 years, you know what? I guarantee you there would be people that would be thinking, you know what? There's a run on unicorns in Dallas, and we've got to go down there and handle that situation. Because if you're told something enough, whether it's true or not, you start to believe it. So when you get these influential, supposedly the smartest minds on the earth, and they say, there's global warming, which leads to climate change, and humans are causing it, and we've got to solve this issue now. Yield up your freedoms in the name of security. If you hear that day after day after day after day, even though it's totally false, you get to thinking, man, you know what? That maybe this old earth is heating up. Maybe there is no God. Maybe He can't control all of this stuff. The problem is, that's why you need to understand the prophecies of the Bible. The Bible tells us there's going to be a world government established. Satan's behind it, and he's going to be lying. It's going to be deception that's driving this thing. It's Satan's main tool, deception. So, as far as climate change goes, today might be sunny, 70 degrees. Tomorrow, it may be raining and drop into the 50s. And there you go. The climate just changed. The climate is changing. So when they say climate change, the climate's been changing every day since God created this earth. Now, globalists, or those that believe in a world government, they claim that carbon pollution or carbon dioxide, CO2, is heating our planet, which is resulting in an increase in droughts, floods, wildfires, that threaten the future of our children. And do you remember back in biology class, CO2 was actually a good thing for plants? We breathe in oxygen as humans and exhale CO2. Plants turn CO2 with light, the sunlight, into plant food. You remember that? What happened to that? I mean, I graduated high school in 1986, and I got a pretty good education, and I thought, you know what? I understand CO2 was a pretty good thing back then. Now they're saying it could kill us before it's all over with. I mean, think about it. But there's an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence given over the years that totally disproves the theory of man-made global warming, which I'm thankful for. There are some scientists out there that have been willing to say, this is crazy. And you know what? You know what they're going to do to those guys? They're going to make plays about them that are endorsed by governments that say, kill climate deniers. And you could say, oh, that was just a joke. That's not a joke. Okay, it's a play. I'll give it that. But at the end of the day, come on, kill climate deniers? Somebody's putting out a message there. And that, I can't believe that the government would allow them to do that. But anyway, well, maybe I can. But for decades, global elitists have been spinning tales of an impending ice age. I mean, back in the 40s and 50s, 60s and early 70s, there was an ice age coming. There were Newsweek. I mean, people were, all kinds of these news sources were running articles. There's an ice age coming. And now it's catastrophic global warming in an effort to do what? Keep the masses in a perpetual state of fear. They went from a coming ice age to, flip on a dime and say, the earth is, they went from global cooling to global warming. And it's been so easily disproven though. The earth's heating up to the point where it's going to blow up. So, but politicians and their on-staff scientists have resorted to promoting fear of man-made climate change because they thought, well, we can't prove the global warming thing anymore because it kind of stalled for like 20 years or so. So we're going to go, don't say global warming anymore, we're going to go to climate change. Now they can blame every hurricane, earthquake, drought, flood. Now think about that. They can blame the drought and a flood on the same thing. They can blame a snowstorm where it gets 10 below zero and the heating of the planet on the same thing. And they say that human beings are causing that because we're putting off too much CO2 emissions. You know, really, at some point, folks, we got to wake up. Like I said, God's been regulating the temperature of this planet for thousands of years. The very idea that a government entity can control the weather or the temperature of the planet by regulating the amount of CO2 that we emit into the atmosphere, that's preposterous. But you know what? There are good people who have bought into this propaganda, and they're starting to believe it because, hey, it's on CNN, it's on MSNBC, it's on NBC, and so people are buying into this. The problem with the world leaders spreading the message that man-made global warming is heating up the planet, which in turn causes all sorts of climate change catastrophes, is that none of it's true. That's right. It's all a lie. Science has already debunked the man-made global warming scam, but you're never going to hear that on CNN. It's not going to be taught in high school or in college that it's been debunked and that it's not true. You got all these people that are pushing for world government. Europe is huge. Read some European newspapers. They are pushing this stuff like you can't imagine. So what are the realities? Is global warming man-made? And if not, why are the politicians, world leaders, the on-staff scientists for these individuals, the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change that works with the United Nations, and the global dreamers, the globalist, international liberationist, the liberalist, why are they continuing to lie about it? Is global warming man-made? That's the question. Well, the entire global warming climate change theory hinges on the premise that humans, through the emissions of greenhouse gases, mainly CO2, which we exhale and goes into plant food with sunlight, the process of photosynthesis and all this other stuff, they're causing the temperature of the earth to rise. That's the premise. And as a result, the climate changes, which leads to all sorts of weather catastrophes, snowstorms, drought, tornadoes, hurricanes, tsunamis, etc. The global warming alarmists contend that the more CO2 humans emit in the atmosphere, the more the planet heats up. And they frantically warn that if this is not stopped, we're going to destroy the planet. So is any of this really happening? The answer is no, it's not. None of this is true. God designed the earth to heat up, cool down. Okay? He designed it through the oceans and all kinds of different things. It's really pretty awesome, his handiwork. And he's in control. And you know, as a matter of fact, most scientists do not agree with this man-made global warming theory. Even though the news media will tell you they do, they've offered sound scientific data debunking this myth. Let me give you just a couple real quick, just proofs that it's not true. Temperature increases CO2, not vice versa. In his now famous global warming documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, former Vice President Al Gore produced a graph, and it was depicting the variations of temperature and levels of CO2 on the atmosphere over the last 650,000 years, according to computer-generated models. If you remember seeing him standing in front of these huge charts. And in the graph, Al Gore strategically separated the two lines and placed the temperature line below the CO2 line. They were way up on the charts. And the temperature line was way below and the CO2 was way up here. And that was done in an attempt to create the delusion that when the amount of CO2 emissions increases, the temperature automatically begins to climb as well. However, Mr. Gore's obvious conclusion was that the global warming was being generated by mankind's modern industrial development, which has increased the amount of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. As a solution, of course, he advocated global laws that would revolutionize our lifestyle, redistribute the wealth of the world through his proposed cap-and-trade legislation, and establish a system of global governance that would end national sovereignty. Okay. After the experts analyzed the graph by placing the CO2 line directly over the temperature line to show how the truth, they proved conclusively the CO2 levels had risen only as a result of a temperature increase first, not the other way around. A closer look at the graph revealed that the lag time between the temperature rising and the CO2 levels changing was at times as much as 800 years. The temperatures went up, then it was 800 years before the CO2 levels began to rise. This one proof alone destroyed the entire, really the basis for the global warming theory. And an increased amount of CO2 does not result in global warming. Actually, the opposite is true. So a second proof, CO2 has risen at a record rate over the last 20 years. But global temperatures have pretty much remained the same. According to an article by James Taylor in Forbes magazine, the U.S. Department of Energy revealed in its estimates of global carbon dioxide, the emissions, now this was the year 2010 through 2001 at that point. I wanted to give a real pointed proof here. Carbon emissions had increased 33% globally, yet the Earth's temperatures had pretty much remained the same over that decade. And then he went on to state that the fact that global temperatures are not rising despite such a significant increase in carbon dioxide emissions provides validation of skeptical arguments, not a cause for heightened alarm. CO2 emissions do not cause temperatures to rise. And then there was ClimateGate, where scientists were leaving out huge amounts of history to make their climate sciences work. So, for instance, in the aftermath of ClimateGate, the ClimateGate scandal, where there were scientists falsifying their information to make the climate scare work, and in a last-ditch effort to keep the global warming hoax alive, these global alarmists attempted to explain away the medieval warming period by stating that, oh, perhaps there were isolated areas of warming. However, there were too many easy-to-understand proofs. The Vikings actually sailed waters that are now frozen. They took advantage of the ice-free seas to colonize Greenland and other outlying areas. Around 1000 AD, the climate was sufficiently warm for the north of Newfoundland to support a Viking colony that came to be known as Vinland, because they had fine grapes and wines were produced there. These areas are under several feet of ice today, but they didn't have coal-burning power plants and SUVs and this, that, and the other. Folks, it's all simply a hoax. And I wanted you to see today how there's ongoing propaganda. You hear it in your news all the time. Arnold Schwarzenegger suing the oil companies. Come on. It's simply propaganda put out by the United Nations, the current world government in the earth, the seat of world government. And it's the same world government that's being established that was prophesied in Revelation chapter 13, that would eventually be, the Antichrist would eventually usurp authority over that entity, the end-time world government, the ongoing fulfillment of this prophecy.
End of the Age is a production of End Time Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. End Time Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.